Okay, folks, it's 1:30. I'm going to start talking now, loudly. Hi. Hey, Mickey, can you get the door? Thanks, man. Welcome to Modern Perl for the Unfrozen Paleolithic Perl programmer. Hi, I'm John. So, disclaimer, I'm going to talk kind of fast. Throw a hand up if I skipped over something that you want to go back and talk about. I was inspired to give this talk by a few online friends that I talk to occasionally that have jobs as Perl programmers, but they're not really engaged with the Perl community. They don't come to YAPC, they don't go to local users groups. They're just using Perl to do their job, to do their work, and they kind of, hit that 9 to 5 and they go home and they have other hobbies. They're what we call normal people. And so there's a widening gulf whenever they ask me questions because the way they do things and the way we do things now are just so disparate that I spend like 2 hours sort of banging my head saying, no, why are you still doing that? So I wanted to put together kind of an info dump. So hi, Unfrozen Caveman Perl programmer. Welcome to 2016. So many things have changed since you fell into that big hole in the ice in 2001. But many haven't. There's a Clinton running for president. We're still using Perl 5. So in 2001, when you had your unfortunate accident, the latest and greatest Perl release was Perl 5.6. There are seats down front if people want to come down front instead of standing at the back. I'll pause for a second or two. It's okay, David doesn't bite. Vicky doesn't bite either. All right, so in 2016, we're all the way up to Perl 5.24. And we've had many, many language improvements over the years. You probably don't remember Unicode because in 2001, it wasn't really that important or that well understood. And it's way too complicated to get into here. You should go to Rick's talk tomorrow at 11 a.m. where he's going to talk about billions of squiggly little characters. But just know that now we can get really expressive in our Perl code. So it's much easier to tell if a developer is happy or when things aren't going quite as well. And this should be a very familiar way of communication for you, given your caveman background. So let's talk about some of these language features. So we got a great new feature in 5.10 called defined or. So who's written code like this? Right? Come on, put your hands up. Instead, in 5.10, you can just write this, right? And that does exactly the same thing, which is really super awesome. This is my favorite Perl feature of the 2000s, by far. This. Who uses defined or? We're gonna do a little survey. Yay, good. You all rock. In 5.14, we got something called non-destructive substitution. So prior to that, if you wanted to use a substitution operator on a variable but preserve the original variable, you had to do this. You had to manually make a copy and then do the substitution on the copy. Now in 5.14, you can just do that, right? And that causes the substitution to only apply to the copy and the original is unmodified. Who uses non-destructive substitution? I actually don't because it never quite stuck, but I'm gonna start. It's very useful in a map. We got postfix dereferencing. So who's written the curly brace dereference, right? Who's had to explain curly brace dereferencing to newbies? Who hates that? So now with postfix dereferencing, you can just write that, and that does the same thing. It dereferences the array that's in $arrayref and returns the whole list. Who uses postfix dereferencing? You and Rick. But Rick really, really likes it, and so
What version is that?
5.20. It went in 5.20, and in 5.24 it's no longer experimental. So you can just use it without having to turn on the experimental feature. I'm looking forward to trying to teach references to beginners using postfix dereference syntax to see if it makes more sense to them. But I haven't had a chance to do that yet. In 5.22, we got a new operator, the double diamond operator. Who's used the double diamond operator? not super popular. So what double diamond does is it works just like the single diamond, but when it goes to open the files that are passed in on argv, it uses 3-argument open, which means that if somebody tries to sneak a pipe character into your command line, it will no longer open a pipe to that thing. It just blows up. And finally, we got subroutine signature support in 5.20, which is a very big deal. I was very happy about this. Subroutine signature support looks like this. So you can have a sort of a function prototype-like thing in your method declaration and declare what variables are getting passed in and assign them numbers. And you'll note that @_ is not being unpacked anywhere and it doesn't even appear on the slide. That's because all that stuff just happens automatically. Who's using subroutine signatures? Yeah, very few people. This is the saddest point of this talk for me. Use subroutine signatures, people. Come on. They don't bite.
Does it work with methods?
It works with methods. It works with everything.
Which version?
It went in 5.20. It's still experimental. Experimental doesn't hurt. It's free. So it's not just language level features, however. We also have a host of new tools that make it easier to work with Perl and do Perl development. So these days, we didn't do this back in 2001, but these days we make a distinction between the Perl that you get with your operating system, which we call system Perl, and we encourage people not to use it for their development projects. So that means good old user bin Perl is no more. Instead, we use new tools to install new, up-to-date modern Perls outside the control of the OS and outside the control of the sysadmins that you may not like. The first tool that was developed for this is called Perlbrew. And you can download Perlbrew at perlbrew.pl. It has a really swanky website with a ninja. And the ninja swings back and forth if you mouse over him. It's pretty cool. There's also a newer option called PLENV. It doesn't have a snazzy website, unfortunately. But you can get it at this URL here. So using one of these tools offers you several advantages, right? You solve the vendor Perl lock-in issue where you go, well, we'd really like to upgrade Perl, but we have to wait for the operating system vendor to do it. No, you don't. You just build your own. If you are a developer or if you're working on a machine that you don't have root on or admin level access, you can install your own version of Perl. You can install multiple versions of Perl. So if you're a module author, this is really great because you can actually test your code against multiple different versions. You can trivially switch, once you've got all those Perl versions installed, you can trivially switch from one to the other. So you can actually run your entire test suite across every major Perl that's been released in the last 10 years before you release something. You don't need special permissions to install modules because you're installing them into directories you already own. And it's easy to stay up to date with Perl development because both these tools let you install new development snapshot versions, which come out once a month, which is nice. PLENV has a few advantages over Perlbrew, and personally that's what I use. It does less magic messing around with your path and the way it's implemented. And you can pin Perl in 3 different ways. You can set a global Perl version that all your shells will get. You can set a per shell version if you just want to change the version in your current shell session and have that change go away after you close that shell session out. You can do that. Or you can actually pin a version per project on a directory level. So if you have one old project that still requires 5.14 or 5.6, God forbid, you can set it up so that when you CD into that directory, everything under that point will use that older Perl while you still use newer Perl everywhere else. Perlbrew does have one advantage over PLENV. I really like that website. Let's continue our survey theme. Who uses Perlbrew? Who uses PLENV? Who uses neither? Wow, okay, cool. All right, so speaking of installing stuff in your home directory, we have this module called locallib. Locallib lets you install your own copies of modules. So even if you don't want to build your own Perl, you can still build modules without special permissions. You can do this in your home directory. You can do it in a project directory. So you can have, if you have a particular project that depends on an old version of a module, you can localize that dependency just to that project. And it integrates well with PLENV and Perl Brew and other tools I'm going to talk about later. Who uses locallib? Yeah, cool. So speaking of installing stuff, we have a new CPAN client called CPAN-, and the command line invocation for that is CPAN-M. So this is the output from using the default CPAN client to install a module. And this is more of the output from CPAN, installing the CPAN module. And it wasn't actually done yet, but pasting that in the slides was a pain in the ass. So this is the output from CPAN-M for installing the same module. And it's much more clear what's going on, and it's much more likely that if there's an actual error, you'll see it as opposed to just paging by it in the noise. Who's switched to CPAN-M? Yay, you are all good people.
Should point out I use --prompt.
I use --prompt and --interactive and yeah, all that stuff. So speaking of stuff on CPAN, we got a whole new website for interacting with CPAN, metacpan.org, which is awesome. Search.cpan.org is still around if you prefer that. Some people do, and that's okay. But metacpan integrates and visualizes a whole slew of information in a way that at least I find really useful. So this is the metacpan page for the module that I was just installing in the previous two slides. It's called GitWrapper. It's something that I maintain because Chris Prather made me. So I'm zooming in on the sidebar here. We have the sidebar over on the left, which is where a lot of that information ends up being displayed. Zooming in on that a little bit, you can see that metacpan provides syntax highlighted source code view. It links to the home page if the distribution sets one up in the metadata. It links to the code repos, shows test results that are updated and active and linked back to CPAN testers. And it will also give you this little activity graph down at the bottom showing you how active the project has been. All of this is information that when you're looking at a module and you've never used it before and you're trying to decide, do I use this one or that one? All this stuff is things that you should be looking at and factor into that decision. It's also open source. So if you can think of a way to make it better, you can. They're extremely responsive to both to pull requests and to just talking about future ideas. Who uses metacpan? Yay. All right. We also have a new search engine in 2016. It's called DuckDuckGo, and it's cool. They don't really track what you do, which is nice, and it's partially written in Perl, but that's not why I'm talking about it. The most useful feature is that they support something called bang searches. So you put an exclamation point and then a keyword, and then you type in your search parameters. Instead of searching the entire web, it searches just a particular site. And if you integrate this into your location bar in your browser in Firefox or Chrome or Safari or whatever you use, it's really easy to hit Control-L or whatever takes your focus up to the location bar and just do bang CPAN or CPAN-M, they both work, and put in a module name, and you'll go directly to the page for that module on CPAN-M, which is pretty sweet. It's a big time saver. Who uses that? Not very many people. More people need to use this. All right, speaking of modules, if you haven't been paying close attention to what's going on in the module world, and since you've been frozen in a glacier, you probably weren't, there are a few new modules you may have missed out on. So anybody doing web development these days needs to use something called JSON. The best module to use to interact with JSON from Perl is called JSON maybe XS, JSON : maybe XS. It will make sure that you, A, have a JSON library available, and if you have multiple ones, it will pick the best possible alternative. Who uses JSON maybe XS? Not very many people. Interesting. To get a handle on how we're doing object-oriented programming these days in Perl, you need to look into Moose. Moose is the meta-object system of choice in Perl these days. And then when you're actually ready to write some code, you can probably get away with just using this much simpler alternative called Moo, which will make your code a little bit faster, unless you really want to get super gnarly and then use Moose. Who uses Moose? And who uses Moo? All right, cool. I do have some bad news for you, Unfrozen Caveman Perl programmer. CGI-PM has been pulled out of core. It's gone. Well, no, not really. You can still install it from CPAN if you absolutely have to, but we encourage you not to. The current standard for web development in Perl is called PLAC, or PSGI. It offers a number of advantages over CGI, and it's the basis for pretty much every modern Perl web framework, of which, as there were in 2001, there are many, and I'm not going to get into it. Speaking of Perl websites, we have quite a few of them these days, which make it easier to keep up with what's going on in the Perl world. So one of the problems with CPAN is that it is chock full of stuff. And it can be hard to decide when there are multiple modules that claim to do the same thing. It can be hard to decide which one to pick. And you can use various criteria like, is the author a jerk? Or is this guy fun to hang out with at conferences? Or how long has it been since they last released something? But sometimes it's also good to hear from users of the module. So we have a website now called CPAN Ratings. It's linked to from MetaCPAN that provides user-supplied reviews of modules. You can see individual reviews, which version of the module they're reviewing, how they rate it, and so forth and so on. And that's integrated into MetaCPAN. It shows you the average number of stars, links to the reviews. We also have CPANTS, which is automated testing of some best practices around module development, how you should develop modules, and make sure all the I's are crossed and the T's are dotted. Wait, strike that, reverse it. Here's what this looks like for a particular module, and it's super useful if you're just getting into module development and you're not sure you're doing things the right way. CPANTS will let you know. And it's also linked to from MetaCPAN. Finally, we have PrePan, which is a place to submit module ideas and get feedback on them. So you can find out, oh, actually this idea that I had is already on CPAN, but it's under a weird name, so I couldn't find it. Or, hey, people think this is a great idea and I'm totally going to do this. Who's used PrePan? A couple of people. Good, cool. Sawyer's getting tired of putting his arm up. He's just like this. We also have some sites that make it easier to keep up to date with what's going on in the Perl world. We have Perl Weekly, which is a once-a-week email newsletter that aggregates a bunch of Perl-related news from all over the web. It was started by Gabor, who is here talking. You should go up to Gabor and say thanks for Perl Weekly. Who reads Perl Weekly? Yay. And in a recent development, actually it was recent when I first wrote this talk, but it's not that recent now. Sawyer, this was actually before Sawyer was elevated to the current lofty role that he occupies as Pump King. He started, he revived the Perl 5 Porter's weekly email summary, where he reads all of the P5P email and pulls out the important bits and makes blog entries and sends out an email, which is awesome if you want to keep up with what's really going on down in the trenches of Perl development, but you don't want to deal with the influx of P5P mail. So, thank you for listening. Welcome to 2016. I hope you enjoy it. It's mostly pretty cool, although maybe don't look at the electoral news for like a little bit longer. And I have a minute and a half left. I'm happy to take questions or grab me later. Yes, sir.
Does it make sense to use local if you're using a Perl group? Or?
The one place where you would do that is if you have a per project need for a specific module version, but you want to use different module versions elsewhere. You could still use, I don't know, if you needed a particular version of DBIC for some reason in one project, but you wanted to use a more recent version elsewhere, local lib would let you do that. Anybody else?
I'm looking at the docs for how to create a new module for CPAN. It doesn't say anything about PrePan. It just has to interact with
Yes. So the question was, I am looking at the documentation for starting a new module on CPAN, and it doesn't say anything at all about PrePan. I'm reasonably sure that those instructions that you're looking at are probably like at least 10 years old.
It's Perl 9.4 on the URLs.
Oh, really? Yes, sir.
We update some of the parts. Someone like you basically pointed that out.
They basically come by and scratch out the expires by date and put in a more modern one. They don't actually change the content of the yogurt cup. So, and this man is showing me a picture of a beer right now, so I think that means I'm done. I'm happy to talk about any of this stuff further. I will probably be somewhere near a beer later.